My name is Paul Roth, and I am very happy to welcome you all here tonight. Thank you for coming. It's my great pleasure to introduce the artist lecture by the 2016 winner of the Scotiabank Photography Award, Suzy Lake. Tonight's talk accompanies Suzy's current solo survey exhibition at the Ryerson Image Centre. This show is a primary exhibition of the Scotiabank Contact Photography Festival. Before we get started, I'd like to ask all of you to please check your cell phones if you haven't done so already. Make sure that they are on mute or buzz or whatever is the most silent setting. And before we start, I'd like to thank some of the key people who have made the exhibition and also this event tonight come to life. I'd first like to thank the staff and volunteers of the Ryerson Image Centre. They are our amazing heart and soul, and together they're responsible for the consistent quality of everything that we do. I am very grateful to all of them, and I want to thank them tonight. Here at Ryerson University, I'd like to thank our president, Mohammed Lachimi, and our interim provost and vice president academic, Chris Evans, for the unflagging support that they have given us. I'd like to acknowledge as well our compatriots in the School of Image Arts, led by the chair, Blake Fitzpatrick, and the Faculty of Communication and Design, headed by Dean Charles Falzon. And finally, we would like to thank our wonderful colleagues at the Scotiabank Contact Photography Festival for yet another outstanding season of photography exhibitions. Darcy, Bonnie, Heather, Ben, Brian, Tara, and the many others who work with them to bring these exhibitions to life over the month of May. We could not ask for better people to head what I think of as the most ambitious, inclusive festival of photography and media arts that I've ever been to. We at Ryerson Image Centre are very proud to be this year's host institution for the festival. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I would like to mention the other exhibitions that we have on display at the RIC in the context of the Contact Festival. In our university gallery, we present Max Dean, As Yet Untitled, curated by Gael Morel. On our Salah J. Bashir new media wall, in our colonnade entrance, we present Souvenir, Kent Monkman, Caroline Monet, Jeff Barnaby, and Michelle Latimer, curated by Gael Morel in partnership with the National Film Board of Canada. Both of these exhibitions are primary exhibitions of the Scotiabank Contact Photography Festival. Also in conjunction with the festival, the Ryerson Image Centre is happy to host 3 public installations. The first is Shelley Nero, Battlefields of My Ancestors, curated by Bonnie Rubenstein. This presentation, featuring the 2017 winner of the Scotiabank Photography Award, is one of 2 parts with additional works from the series presented across town at Fort York Historic Site. In the Pond on Devonian Square, we are pleased to present Laurie Blondeau, Assini Eskew, curated by Bonnie Rubenstein. In our student gallery, we have Alexa Phillips, Cyborg Clones. And finally, the third of our public presentations, part of the public installation program of the Contact Festival, is on the west and north side glass facade of the Ryerson Image Centre. If you look closely, you will notice that the faces that have decorated that facade for some time, since our opening in 2012, have changed. And we're currently presenting Spotlight Canada, Faces That Changed the Nation, a new mural of portraits featuring the RIC's newly acquired collection of Canadian photographs from the New York Times Photo Archive, a promised donation of real estate businessman Chris Brady to the RIC. Please note, we are recording tonight's talk. After Suzy speaks, we will open everything up for a Q&A, and we will provide a microphone for any audience member who has a question. Please wait for the microphone to arrive before you speak, as we want you to be heard clearly, both in the room and on the recording. And now it is my honor to introduce tonight's main event. We are proud to partner with Scotiabank, funders of both the award and the festival, to present Canada's most important photographers year after year. I want to highlight the role that Scotiabank plays in this event because it's not immediately apparent as it is when you go to see the exhibition. But we are very much indebted to Scotiabank. Thanks are due in particular to Joan Burgess, who ably runs the Scotiabank Photography Award year after year, and to the whole team at Scotiabank. The Suzy Lake exhibition was curated by Gael Morel, exhibitions curator here at the RIC, working with the artist directly and Georgia Sherman of Georgia Sherman Projects in Toronto. And we want to thank Suzy and Georgia for working so closely with us over the past year to make this exhibition as great as it is. Thank you. This exhibition explores the career of a renowned Canadian artist, the 2016 Scotiabank Photography Award winner, Suzy Lake. Suzy is known internationally for her work on female identity, self-representation, and the aging body. This survey of more than 50 artworks and objects made between 1976 and 2014 brings focus to Lake's artistic process and methodologies in particular, and to a great extent that will be the subject of tonight's talk. The show includes never-before-seen photographs, maquettes, and working materials alongside some well-known material, and examines a career, really a lifetime, a working lifetime of experimentation and dedication to pushing the boundaries, formal, material, intellectual, and psychological, of the photographic medium. The Suzy Lake exhibition is also accompanied by a book published by Steitel Verlag in Germany, which is available for sale at the Ryerson Image Centre's reception desk. And with that, please join me in welcoming Suzy Lake.
I'm being fixed. Okay, excuse me. I'd actually like to thank some of the same people as well, as Paul has previously done, just because they're so terrific. And I want to thank Natalie for putting this evening together. I loved working with Gael Morel and Valerie Matteau in terms of putting the exhibition together with Georgia Sherman. The exhibition is part of one of the three parts of the Scotiabank Prize, and so therefore I want to thank Joan Burgess for all her support. This really has been a year to put this show together, a year to put the book together, and it's been a real wild ride. It's been an amazing year. And because it's been such a crazy year, I always have to thank Bob Yoshioka and Georgia Sherman, because they're the ones that keep propping me up when things get rough. I'm really excited to talk about the work in this show. Well, I'm excited about the show to begin with because it really focuses on the process of and how I make work and the materiality of my work, as opposed to always like the large finished piece. And I love actually working with my hands. I primarily make my own work, except when it gets too big. And actually, I'm saying I love making my own work, and I have the nerve to say that when my printer is here in the audience. Okay, so, I think that, making one's own work is particularly important because when you're working with your materials, you really shift and you start thinking in the visual language. It's no longer translated into theory or English or whatever, even if it has an academic orientation. The thing is like you're already working in your mother tongue. So the lecture will address the work in the exhibition and focus on my process because it's how I think. And you'll see that I'm looking at notes because there's a lot of work in the show, and I could talk about this for an hour. I don't want to put you to sleep. But this is the earliest work in the show. It's from 1976. And some of you that know my work know that I did quite a bit of portraiture prior to this work, using the portraits to address issues of representation. The value in the portrait work going towards this work taught me that in the search for one's voice, that there's often a resistance that's taking place. So I shifted to using the body as a metaphor to investigate the dynamic of resistance and power relations. The marionette really did seem like the perfect metaphor to illustrate a non-collaborative sense of control and when control is in the hands of someone else. In these images, these are actually relatively small. They're 11 by 14. And I chose to, well, that's me. And before somebody asks the question, I use a time delay, I use a shutter extension, I use all of those things to take my own image. I do have a little bit of a background in dance and a little bit of a background in mime, so it was easy for me to be in front of the camera and have a sense of what I look like. But I used the slow shutter speed to really focus on the movement. In other words, like the struggle or the fact that the string in these images is really manipulating the puppet. And, oh, I can't move away from the mic. How am I going to dance? In these photographs, see, I was not a trained photographer. I was trained as a painter printmaker. So it didn't occur to me that once I printed these nice little 11 by 14 photos, which in 1976 were considered substantial size, that why wouldn't I sew thread or string right directly onto and into the photographs? And what it did do is it brought much more significance to like the items of control for the puppet. I do love these little guys, I always have, but somehow in terms of the issue of power dynamics, it didn't seem enough for me. The power dynamic was there because of the marionette, but and those were the signifiers that I needed, but it needed a context. So I built a puppet stand. And the puppet stand was 10 feet by 12 feet by 8 feet deep. And I asked my friends to act as the puppeteers. I am actually suspended a few inches off of the ground, so there's no way that once I'm being manipulated by these straps that I have the opportunity to gain some control over the movement. The puppeteers had full control. Now, I am going to literally read the definition of power relations. Relations between parties, absent of any common framework of law or consensus, are power relations. Whereas most of us were raised with a sense of trust to the more collaborative idea of authority relations, and that definition is relations between individuals or groups, if regularized and subject to rules, be they traditional or legal, are authority relations, which means that they're collaborative. Okay, I do think of my photographs as having much more of a performance vocabulary, no matter how much I love photography and the inherent qualities of the medium. So oftentimes I call them performances, and my interest is to actually create an image where there's a sense of duration or a sense of performance that the photograph is still performing for you, even though it's a still image. So in these works, I used a specific shutter speed to imply duration of like the movement, and it was very specific. I wanted to capture the attempted struggle for control in a manner where you see the movement, but the figure is defined enough for some form of empathy relationship to the audience, that the audience could understand what that might feel like. But I didn't want to stop action because then all of a sudden it's going to look like a document. And I didn't want a slower shutter speed because, as beautiful as it would look like a Sumi brush drawing, and all of a sudden the threat would be gone in terms of its attractiveness. And furthermore, it was really important to me that I was the puppet, so that I actually had the experience of being in that puppet stand when the puppeteers were moving me. So sometimes that was like really uncomfortable. I did have what I call art scars. Because if they were really swinging me hard, the thing is, it's like I couldn't protect myself as I hit the sidebars. What I did know is that since I didn't have a pulley system, it was so hard on the puppeteers to actually lift my dead weight that they couldn't do it for very long. So I was safe over time. But the reason that it was important for, well, there's two reasons. I'm always in my photographs because I feel that just as a painter, when they present their work, it's understood that the imagery or whatever is in the work is the artist's muse. It's what the artist thinks about. And so in the photograph, the thing is, I felt that it was really important that I am the model in the photograph, because this is, in fact, what I'm positing to, like, the audience. I didn't want there to be any assumption that I was hiring an actress. I wanted it to actually be, about what the artist is thinking and the concepts that I'm building, not a piece of theater when I use the term performance. But that's an overview in terms of why I use myself in my work, and specifically in this piece, having the experience of losing control and yet trying to still protect myself in the experience gave me the directive in which to be able to edit, which were the right photographs to print. A lot of photographs that actually looked like good photographs did not represent the experience, and so I never printed them. And I shot a heck of a lot of film on this. And I did work in, both black and white and color. In the exhibition, you'll see like the maquettes in black and white, and you'll see the color ones. And they were done in Cibachrome. Back in those days, color was so unstable that photographers were afraid to use regular color, so they used Cibachrome, which always had strange color casts. So go figure the trade-off. Okay. All of this work, the puppet work, was shown in 1977, and this was the Centaur Gallery, which became Optica Gallery. And so just to give you a sense of everyone was freaking out that I had a 10-foot by 12-foot photograph in the gallery. And back then, you couldn't actually, you can have something like that printed now, but back then you couldn't. And so I printed it in sections, 6 sections, and I wallpapered it to the wall, which meant that the piece never survived. And now it was remounted a few years ago, and we have this, as you walk into the Rick Gallery, the beautiful full-scale puppet. Whenever I've actually remounted a work, I've tried to, in fact, follow the similar processes. So instead of having it be one large photograph, it is again in 6 sections. The thing is, the idea of scale, again, goes back to the issues of performance and the importance that I had to have an audience-performance relationship with the photograph and the audience. So a sense that the audience could actually almost walk into the photograph, or that they could identify with the figure as another person. I think in finishing this series, the important thing that I learned from the experience of making it was that empowerment can come from understanding the elements of resistance. Once you see the power dynamic that you're caught in, you have the beginning understanding to be able to dismantle it. This video was done about the same time. It's actually my favorite video. I'm wrapped up in 100 feet of muslin. This is actually in the lobby of the Rick. And you'll see that static electricity makes it very difficult for me to unravel. The idea, again, was the notion of a lack of control, and yet the dignity of the struggle to try and get free or move towards empowerment. So in this work, in this video, the interesting thing about the video is that I paced the visual information as sparsely as I possibly could. So at the beginning of the tape, you just see fabric moving. And the only thing that you hear is my struggle, but you don't see me. And you don't know what that breathing is really all about. And just at the point where I'm second-guessing that my audience is going to walk away, I then allow myself to come into frame. And again, you see the struggle, you see the fabric being pulled up, and just when it gets to the point where it's a little bit tedious, I give a little bit more information so that you see the figure a little bit more. So that frustration by the audience is also like the frustration of the figure. It's also the anticipation of the figure. You'll see that the figure actually is rolling, and what should be able to kind of unravel oneself, but static electricity, the fabric actually sticks to the figure, and the figure is no better off, but the struggle continues. So eventually, in the video, at the point where you think that this is going to continue even longer, someone lifts up the end of the fabric and snaps it to actually unroll the figure, and of course then I walk away. For the next year or two, I pursued various permutations to imply that control is in the hands of the other, and still, focusing on the struggle for empowerment. These works are called Against the Wall, and in this work, as opposed to the puppets, instead of having such a heavy metaphor such as the marionette, I used the distressed wall of my studio for the context of isolation or alienation in this work, and there were about 10 of these images. You'll see in the exhibition that there's a lot of storyboards, studies, and even contact sheets to elaborate the movement to free oneself, or my stance on freeing oneself is the issue of empowerment. I found that even looking at the contact sheets, I guess as a former mime or a former dancer or a performance artist, my contact sheets, just looking at the single images, really had, a sense of performance about them. So in this body of work and in other bodies of work, I really took the contact sheets, in fact, very seriously, not just as a reference for editing, but also as potential artworks. I used them to learn from, as well as designating them as minor works. You'll see that in 1977, I was not afraid to draw on the photographs. I mean, you can see the influence of the contact sheet just even in the sequencing of these different pieces. So in the lower one, I'm actually drawing on it to emphasize like the bondage or the restrictions that I'm under. The top one is just a strip out of a storyboard to kind of emphasize the shape of my body in terms of the movement. You'll also notice that the body is just kind of a really strange shape. And there's a warp because I actually heated and stretched my negatives. Back in 1977, that was sacrilegious, and photographers would cross the street rather than call me a photographer. Oh yeah, she's a printmaker. Okay, so yes, documentary photographers were shocked. This image was shot by Larissa Eisler from the RIC to indicate the variations in terms of scale that I think that these works I'm learning from. So the contact sheets, I would learn something about like the entire choreography. We actually put the heated and stretched negatives in light boxes so that you could see the atrocious thing that I did to them. And then the two images in the center are the same negatives printed life scale. So again, the issue is not bigger is better, but the scale attempts an empathy with the audience to have, so that the photograph is actually having dialogue with you in terms of understanding like the struggle. Okay. This work is a detail of 6 images out of 14 owned by the Art Bank. And originally, it was an installation that could have contained up to 84 photographs. It's called Are You Talking to Me? And if that sounds familiar, yes, I did steal that from Robert De Niro. I'm second guessing, even though, like, as I get older and still remember the movie, everybody still sees that film. But I'm referring to the scene where Robert De Niro is in the washroom. And the thing is, it's like seediness of society is kind of pushing him over the edge, and, you know, he's succumbing to it, and he's freaking out, in the washroom, and all of a sudden he goes, "Are you talking to me? Are you talking to me? I don't see anybody else here. Are you talking to me?" And I remember sitting in that theater, and it was like, you know, back in the old days when theaters were like 600 seats, and I thought, oh my God, he's actually coming right out of that film and he's talking directly to me, just because of like the gaze, just the directness and whatever. And I just, I wanted to figure out how he did it. And could I actually do that? Because, of course, several times I've mentioned to you, like, I really wanted to have a closer dialogue with my photographs and my audience. So I began photographing myself in conversation and regarding something upsetting that bothered me. And I think that we all go through it, and the natural defense would be to say, oh yes, but Jane did not mean that, and so on, and you kind of bring yourself back to reality. But there was no one there to actually block or redirect Travis Bickle, and the thing is like, I wanted to actually have this conversation where I didn't check myself, that, you know, that I pursued this self-indulgent nightmare so that I could see what that looked like on film, photographic film. The specific conversation has never been important for the audience to know, other than that it goes into like a very emotional situation over several rolls of film. You could see that I pull back, that there is some protection, and then, you know, it kind of it goes a little bit more emotional again. And because I wanted to see what it looked like when I actually hit that point of maybe not having that control. And to me, that was what the power of the film was, as well as then transmitting it to the audience. I shot this several times to achieve the images that looked that looked right, and yet they did not look acted. And the problem was, even though every time I reshot, it was authentic, some looked very passive, some looked like dramatic theater, or so on and so forth. And so these were some of like the black and white ones that actually were in the installation. But this is the phase, this is part of my process in terms of, okay, this looks like the right emotion, but the thing is, in terms of an overall duration and that sense of conversation, it's not enough. What do I have to do? Okay, so again, well, one of the things that actually when the black and white ones were on, I registered everything at the mouth. So the photographs are hung at irregular heights, and it creates a rhythm. And I thought that was really great. And if I heated and stretched the negatives, that would actually emphasize the point of that tension between control, self-control, and the lack of control. And that would even give it more rhythm, just like a cadence in a conversation. Then I felt that I needed kind of like a counterpoint, because I had a rhythm going, and it was an erratic rhythm that I chose to bleach out parts of the photograph and then paint them in with traditional glaze painting techniques, And just so that it would not look like a different medium, then I rephotographed it in color. I learned an awful lot from doing this exhibition in terms of really trying to create a rhythm, create a sense of directly addressing, the audience member in the gallery when they came in, the way that I felt in the theater. And this is actually an installation of like the full work at the Art Gallery of Ontario with all 88 pieces. This shows you the difference between the black and white photo and like the colored photo. What you'll see in the exhibition that's never ever been shown before is the sequence of a sequence of 6 of "Are You Talking to Me?" that are the black and white and the color photographs, and you'll also see the actual painting that I did. It's the painting, not a photograph. Okay, into the 80s. Pre-resolution using the ordinances at hand is probably the first time where the figure's no longer the victim. As the title suggests, the dismantling of confinement could be internal confinement or external confinement, and that resistance is a process. In these images, by the way, that was my living room, and I did paint the walls Chinese lacquer red for the shoot. And when I saw the photos, oh, and the one thing that everybody finds interesting is the sledgehammer was my Mother's Day gift that year. When I photographed these pieces, I loved them, but to me, the photographs were not enough. Again, for a skinny woman bashing down the wall, and it happens to be red, she's wearing primary colors, it starts to look kind of arty. But the thing is, it's like it needed a context. It needed, okay, so she's smashing down the wall. Why? There was no answer to why in just the photographs as documents. So in the finished pieces, I chose to actually build the frame out of 2x4 lumber, which obviously frames are not that big and bulky, so it started to suggest a box. And if it was a box, then the figure had been confined. And then on the box, I did a trompe l'oeil painting so that it looked like an extension of the room. The box was the room that the figure was breaking out of. The other thing that I did was when I built the frame, I dadoed the angle so that the photograph was on a slight angle and leaning back. So it would have a sense of breaking out. Before I got to that point, I tried various solutions in terms of what I could do with the context. Photographing the demolition wasn't enough, and so I tried trimming the photograph to a shape that would suggest the action, and those studies are actually in the exhibition. The photograph on your left actually was the very first bashing down the wall piece that I did. Just for a little piece of history, it was done for the bus shelters. There were a group of artists that put their artwork in bus shelters. and that was the first version in black and white with tinted. And then on your right is the little prototype that's never been exhibited. And I've always kind of kept it special for myself because as I was testing out all of like the imagery that I've just shown you in this series, this was the first kind of culmination of how I thought that I was going to resolve the work. Following pre-resolution, my work actually turned to the politics of the environment, but by the 1990s, I realized I wanted to return to using my body and be the performer for the camera. The problem was I was no longer young, and how do I address the aging body without alienating an audience under 50? My friend told me I carried too many stones as part of a larger series that attempts to positively represent the aging body. One that likely includes a history of having past battles. Past tense and moving forward is important. Being an older woman, I could appreciate experience and maturity as a different beauty. In these works, we almost witness the figure peeling wallpaper as if we're looking through a window. And it's a construction of two distinct photographic layers. So, like, there's a photograph of me peeling the wallpaper, and then I photographed the wall, made a window, a 1/4 of an inch window mat, and then wrapped the photograph of the wall around the window mat, then mounted them together. Peeling wallpaper, like many other repetitious activities, is a quiet, rhythmic, and soothing activity. In such a state, priorities can naturally rise to the fore in preparation of change or something new. So I don't think of this as I think of this as positive state of mind rather than cleaning house. This is a true space. They're photographs that are 3 inches by 3 inches embedded in plaster. This whole series is a quieter body of work than I had previously done, and it's almost poetic. The image is cropped in these to focus on the sweeping rhythm. Again, it's like the peeling the wallpaper. It's the rhythm that's very soothing. This time the window is plaster and it's stressed to emphasize its materiality and graphic surface. I saw these pieces as a talisman towards the preparation for rebuilding. Chrysalis on the right continues the exploration that combines qualities of both the plaster pieces and too many stones. I often did this to kind of hone in on details and what works and what doesn't work. My students, if there's any students in the audience, they'll laugh because I always use the term aesthetic bracketing. A decade before the sweeping image ever became the installation that people are aware of that was on the AGO hoarding, it originated actually as single images. I loved the determination of the figure. I loved the images. I really believed in them. But they were the last ones to be printed because I was really worried about like the association with Cinderella. I kept thinking, but the determination is different. Yes, I did have a slip-on. It's about vulnerability. There's all kinds of reasons that I photographed it. And finally, I felt that if I used scale, that might start to actually separate and bring you closer to the idea of the experience, of the sweeping, of the determination, and of the rebuilding. So for me, scale opened up the emotional and physical labor of this work. I continued to be fascinated with the slip in the rereading recovery murals. Gail likes this. I know. And it's really hard to photograph and show what's really happening. It was chosen. The slip was chosen as the figure's protection. And although it was really very fine linen and it suggested a vulnerability, the thing that really interested me was that the body's fascia, you know, the tissue, connective tissue around your muscles, is also very fine, but it has a tensile strength, like an armor in terms of body protection. So in order to actually really focus in on the slip, I rephotographed myself sweeping, but then I removed the figure to focus on the slip, and I cut it out, and the photographs then were copper-toned to simulate the color of skin. And with the body removed, the gestures of my sweeping still actually gives a reference to the body in absentia. I peeled the photographic emulsion from the resin-coated paper. Oh no, there she goes again. With all the paper removed, the emulsion is very, very thin. It's almost thin like, you know, in the summer when you have sunburn and your skin peels. It's really that thin, and it's quite vulnerable. And so I took this cut-out slip, peeled the emulsion, and then before wet mounting it to paper for a chincolet, I wrinkled the emulsion so that it would look like aged skin. So this is a slip. Hopefully there's a detail that you can actually see the texture of the wrinkles. The gallery's open late tonight, so you can actually, if you don't believe me, you can go look for sure. But ageism is another glass ceiling for women. To address this head-on, I grew a 3-month beard. And I often think that I can do anything that Taylor Swift can do, and she can't grow facial hair. So, but it's true. With irony, I was commuting out to Guelph, and I realized why men do this now. So if this was our last taboo that we know of so far, I wanted to kind of present it to address it. And so I photographed myself with colored gels and glamour lighting while plucking my facial hair. And yes, the pull of the tweezers and the pull of the skin is deliberate. I began this work around 2001 at the same time as Cher's the last farewell tour. And it was the same time that I kept seeing on talk shows middle-aged actresses were so surgically desperate and giddy to stay young in order to keep working. And the way they spoke on these talk shows, I felt was unnecessarily pathetic. Because at the same time, men of the same age were considered mature. So go figure. As long as I had all that facial hair, I might as well keep on working. This was a body of work where, again, it's like the idea of how do you sell something? How do you invert the taboo? So from a distance, 20-something, it looks like a 20-something perfume ad. And, you know, the closer you get, the more visceral it becomes, and the facial hair is more explicit. The skin is oily. There's tobacco-stained teeth, you know, so on and so forth. So in terms of, you know, what is classified as being beauty, I was getting impatient with the reference of older women still signifying the barren crone or the senior artist with nothing left to say. I think ageism is just as much of a construct as the media's idealized beauty. And in talking about media, the thing that was interesting to me a couple of months ago, Special K had a series of commercials where they talk about 97% of women have an I hate my body moment every day. And at the same time, and sometimes even consecutively broadcast on TV, Khloe Kardashian launched a new TV show called Revenge Body that suggests that dressing and enhancement for the male gaze is still alive and well. So, enhancement. Could I remove the ew factor enough to make the ritual of plucking facial hair as natural as it is? We see men shaving on TV all the time. This work, there's two little pieces in the exhibition that are studies, and they were intended as studies that I was going to do something very decorative in a repetitive pattern to make wallpaper. The wallpaper is not in the exhibition, but I actually made enough panels. I shot about 6 or 7 rolls of film, medium format film, and I actually repeated, there's very few image repeats on this piece. But I have enough panels to actually go around and completely tailor a room. Just to let you know where those maquettes actually went to in terms of the exploration of beauty at a proper distance. Again, this work initially reads as a formal portrait with the colored gels combining to amplify the profile edge on the face. At a distance, it's elegant, and as one gets closer, the long facial hair becomes quite visible. Again, I love the opportunity to do have the audience do a double reading, to seduce you with one thing and then make you realize that you're looking at something different in order to get the ageism point across, or the representation. A number of years later, I wanted to return to performing like the simple gestures I did in the early 70s, like the very, very early conceptual years. And I also had to stop and think about what can I celebrate the body with better than the feeling of breathing or breath. Breathing. In these images, I'm breathing in front of the camera with a long exposure, thinking that it would be just the sway of my chest that would blur. When I finally developed the film, in fact, I realized I couldn't stand perfectly still for a full hour, and in thinking I was, my torso swayed without me even knowing. I wasn't upset because I actually learned something that was bringing me closer to what the work was about. Although it originally appeared in those early photographs that I was trying to do an endurance piece to stand perfectly still for an hour, I was more interested in portraying a strong body by recording my breathing and being a part of the world. My feet were detailed and really anchored to the ground. And so therefore I feel that the figure is identifying with the landscape. I find that a lot of times, very simple work is great, but if it's frontal, then there's a problem because people look at it like a poster and then go on to the next one. So in order to buy time to look at the image longer, I played with backlighting, color temperature to make the photograph as beautiful as possible. It wasn't necessarily about a beautiful photograph, but it was about putting this figure, this blurred figure, in the most positive and beautiful context that I could, so that it would be positive connotations in a sense of empowerment, of strength. And if they were visually seductive elements to seduce the audience, then the quiet meaning of the figure would become more available. The long exposure describes so much detail in the foliage that the whole image looks very still in contrast to the slight sway of the figure. I did about 10 photographs in color that were always intended to be light boxes because I loved that the stillness and the play with color and the richness, and it was almost like a painting, but you knew that it wasn't a painting. But I actually then made prints, and after performing exclusively in my garden and then privately at the Banff Centre, I began performing in public places to amplify the duration of the photograph exposure with a comparison of public movement. So I'm standing perfectly still. There's people around. They're moving at a different rate than I am, and so you can measure it against. So you can see the figure in it's Trinity Bellwoods Park with the bike. They've been sitting there almost the same length of time as I, but they're not standing still. You can see that there was actually someone watching me being photographed right on the left-hand side of the image here. So you can second guess that they were standing there for about 10 minutes trying to figure out what in the heck I was doing. As well as Trinity Bellwoods Park, I performed at the World Trade Center, the Metropolitan Museum of Art before they changed their staircase, Trafalgar Square, and the Detroit Art Institute staircase. My big thrill was to actually do this one-hour performance in the Detroit Art Institute Rivera frescoes. So all of the places that I chose, I wanted to be recognizable so that the sites seemed familiar to the audience. But the personal aspect of growing up with this artwork was not important to appreciate the artwork, but it was just so important to me because I grew up in Detroit. And the Rivera frescoes were particularly special. My grandfather was an amateur painter, and he regularly took me to the Art Institute to look at the work. But since he actually watched Rivera paint during his lunch hour in the 30s, I was like 5, 6, 7 when he told me the stories. I remember him telling me the stories. I can't tell you what he said, but it was just so important to him that he take me and tell me the story of watching Rivera. So, I mean, the site was particularly important to me, and they continue to amaze me. The experience of standing for an hour was quite different for me as a performer because I was actually studying every panel of the north wall. Although I performed midweek, the museum was particularly busy. The curator of the Art Institute was, Rebecca Hart, was fantastic. A sign was prepared announcing the performance and inviting people in so that they wouldn't politely stay off to the side to avoid disrupting the performance. The explanation of being invisible was made so clear. There was also in the announcement the challenge to remain in the performing area long enough to be recorded. So you could see some people actually did try and maintain a visibility, but to let you know really how many people were going through that performance area that day, it was quite phenomenal. And you could see the two boys actually, did wind up showing up in the final artwork. But the art class that was running at the Institute, they stood there for like over 5 minutes, and they're not recorded. See that cute little blonde guy that was standing next to me? Okay. Because the teacher explained what was going on, he was... He really was trying to make me move. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I hope I didn't go too long. If I was too brief in terms of trying to keep within the time frame, I'm happy to accept any questions.
Thank you very much, Suzy. Can you hear me?
I told you all my secrets.
So we're going to take questions from the audience. You can see Simone here and Natalie at the back. If you are interested in asking a question, please raise your hand. I'll call on you, but then, as I said earlier, please wait for the microphone to get to you so that we can hear you clearly. So, we have a question over here.
Hi, Suzy. My name is Anana, and my question to you is, earlier today I saw on the event page that someone commented that they're very disappointed seeing your show because they were like, it's a bunch of selfies. I don't get it. How would you address someone, or how would you address this problem that people view your work as just a bunch of selfies?
Well, what can I say? They are. The serious answer to it is that, I think that a lot of selfies are done to establish, I am here, I am doing this, I am, valid, I am participating in these things. So, I might, as an artist, find that concept a little bit thin, where, but it is a concept, and it is important, and especially it's important now in the context of the time that we're living. For me, I think I'm addressing, a concept, a little bit more universal concept, and which means that I have to really construct the circumstance so that the audience really understands, what I'm doing. But if they, if somebody actually comes to it like, oh, it's a selfie, and they're thoughtful, they probably could pull, what their own experience is in terms of doing a selfie and come to like a little bit more sophisticated realization. Obviously, they didn't.
We have a question over here.
Thanks. Hi, thanks for speaking tonight. You mentioned when you were showing one of the images of yourself tweezing the hair from your chin, you said the tension wasn't an accident. And I was wondering if that was a reference to your earlier images of the marionettes and the threading of like sewing the thread through your own body, because it kind of had that quality. So were you in some ways alluding to those earlier images?
Well, in terms of like the puppets with the string, I sewed it in the approximation of where the marionette straps would be. I certainly didn't necessarily mean it in terms of, you know, puncturing the body. But yeah, I mean, those signifiers that cause attention, to me, I'm hoping are signifiers that, you know, will cause an empathetic or an emotional response in the viewer. And the thing is that if you are responding to something, then you're starting to understand it in the first person singular. So, in other words, if I'm talking about the lack of control, the thing is like your empathy is towards the photograph, but if you're feeling it, you understand what that lack of control is on your own. So in other words, instead of only understanding, you know, what I'm presenting to you, you're coming to my work on your own terms.
Thank you.
Other questions? All the way to the back there. Perfect.
Hello, my name's Phoenix. Thank you very much for speaking. I found that in the marionette pictures and the other ones, that a lack of control was a very common theme. Is that because in your life you felt a very large lack of control?
Well, I think that what it was more that I felt that control, I was restricted, that the control was in the hands of someone, the other. I mean, it could range from, I mean, I'm the first generation in my family, a working class family, to go to university. So I just assumed that women, you know, went to university. And that whatever I was studying, you know, I could get a job. The thing is, it's like what I realized was that my family had no connections, and so it wouldn't help. And seeing how the world worked, you know, how the world worked was a little bit different. Or seeing that the thing is, it's like when I worked at the bank. Sorry, Joan. This was 1965. When I worked at the bank, the thing is, it's like I was a commercial loans teller, but I was making the same amount of money as the men working in the mailroom. You know, so how do you change these things? And in other words, like you have to start. So the control in the hands of the other was really very much about a politicized view of the world in terms of, you know, gaining some ground and gaining one's voice.
We had a question over here.
Is there a question over here?
It's okay.
Sorry if it's personal, but have you, when you were creating these works, you lived in different cities and different areas, different environments? Or were you constantly, perhaps in Detroit, I don't know where you live, perhaps my follow-up question is, do you find that your inspiration of resistance or ageism or the many themes that you touched upon were universal concepts that you faced, or they were directly correspondent to where you were living in that culture, that environment?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm sure that growing up in Detroit left an imprint on me. I lived in Montreal for 10 years. That left an imprint on me. I've been in Toronto ever since. But you're right. I mean, I think that in terms of, I've always been very adamant about the concepts as I present them as artwork are much more universal. So therefore, those things that begin to provoke a work may be irritations in my life, and when they accrue, they start to form a symptom. And when you recognize that it's a symptom of something, then when you see it's a symptom of something, you almost realize it's part of a dynamic of something. And that gives me the ability to then prepare a metaphor so that what I'm talking about is accessible to everybody. If I did it more biographically, then the work would always read as a theater piece about the person, you know, and I didn't want my work to go that way.
Other questions? Right there. Sorry.
Thank you for tonight. Did you smash the wall in Montreal then, or the red wall?
Well, no, that was a Toronto wall.
Okay, cool.
You know, Toronto's a tough city to move to.
Thanks.
Hi, Suzy. You know, your work's always been so implicitly political, and I know you have, as an American, Canadian-American now, you know, you must be enraged with what's happening south of the border. I just wonder how, if at all, you're planning to respond, or, you know, what reactions you might have through Suzy Spice or other Suzys. And I also wanted to say, I think Suzy invented the selfie, right?
Well, it's actually funny that you actually raised Suzy Spice, because I was in out of town in a group show and shared a room with Martha Wilson, who's very, very famous for, you know, dressing up as Tipper Gore several of the president. Oh, she does. She looks exactly like Bill Clinton when she dresses as Bill Clinton. And her last one at several protests is she's gone as Donald Trump. And the joke was that I was going to bring my Suzy Spice costume and go as a Melania. But I didn't. I think that, well, I mean, the interesting thing about this year being so busy and all of the accoutrements to this wonderful prize, it really is a sequence of opportunities, not just a prize. And so new work is delayed, but yes, I've got something on the back burner, well, that's coming on the front burner soon. I've even bought the material to make my costume already. But I can't tell anybody. Yeah, oh.
Thank you. Hi. I noticed that you have always, or at least from what I've seen today, that you're always framing your work. And I understand some of the conceptual frames that you've used, but I'm curious about the impulse to put performances in a frame.
Well, for me, I started out doing performance in the studio to understand relationships of things and how to deal with content without it looking like an illustration. And I started photographing my performances so that I could study, you know, what I was doing and how that visual language was transmitting information. Then I actually did a lot of live performance in the studio, private performance, you know, quick things in the gallery. Very few of it was formalized, and not a lot of it was put on video. At a certain point, I don't know if it was just because of my dance training or theater training, it just, it was almost like me leaving painting because I was falling into the tropes I almost felt that I needed to leave performance as live performance because I was falling into those tropes. It was almost too easy for me. And for me, the challenge was to actually make my photographs perform, or have the sense of performing, or have a sense of duration, that an activity is continuing when you just look at a still photograph.
Hi there. I just wanted to say, as someone who has made work for decades now, do you have any sort of words of wisdom or any comments, I guess, about how you've moved from one body of work into another and sort of those moments in between?
Well, I think that even in my talk, although there might, there might have been a decade in between some of like the imagery that I've shown, the thing is, it's like there's a real continuity. I mean, the thing is, my work is always asking questions. How can I address this? Or it's almost like Sarah's question. How can I make a statement about Donald Trump that's going to have resonance, that it's not just going to be another meme, And so you ask a question and you start finding the pieces to actually put it together. So even if, like I'd have a successful minor piece or a successful major piece or whatever, I've learned so much from that it also provides me with more information to ask the next question. So a lot of it is quite linear in the sense that I don't think I'm repeating myself. I think that, I'm still moving into the nuances, visual nuances that I hadn't touched earlier. But it's just, I guess what you're asking is, and I'm going to be blunt about it, either you choose to be a career artist that makes art to sell, or you just give over to the passion and keep following it because it's feeding you.
Thank you very much for your talk. Photography being such a phallocentric field or discipline, I wonder, and especially in the context of Canadian contemporary photography, I was wondering, how do you see your practice in relation to photoconceptualism, for example, or the Vancouver School? And also I just wanted to say that I found your practice really refreshing because I think that it really exists somewhere in between, never quite in one discipline, but always between performance, photography, and sculpture. So I find that really interesting. It's like as if you're pushing the medium of photography beyond its own capacities. So so coming back to the question, how do you see your work in relationship to these very to these other photographic practices?
You mean straight documentary? Certainly, if I can stand up here and talk about how much I've learned from performing, how much I've learned from painting, how much I've learned from drawing, I've learned a tremendous amount from traditional photography, and also investigating the inherent qualities of photography. I mean, the standing for an hour photographs, I'm asking my camera to do something that it wasn't made to do. And there's a famous German photographer that actually had 45-minute exposures, and I went up to him and I said, "Oh, those are just so beautiful." I said, "Was that a 45-minute exposure?" And he was so offended that I technically knew how he did it by asking that question. He was German.
Any other questions? Another one down here.
So this one's a little more serious, sorry. So that's akin to pinhole photography. I mean, do you see, like your f-stop must be, you don't have to get technical, but it would be very, very small. So like, it is akin to pinhole photography?
Well, no. The thing is, it's not just using neutral density. Well, yeah, I shoot at f32, but it's not just during the daylight. I have to use up to 14 filters, neutral density filters. But at a certain point in calculating those stops, the thing is, it's like you have to also calculate to avoid the reciprocity factor. And so it isn't just a matter of one stop, two stop, three stops equivalent to one filter, two filter, three filter. I wound up being kind of proud of myself that I was doing a little bit of physics here, and it's just like, hey, I was an art student in school.
For those of you who don't know technical photography, it is not easy to take a 45-minute exposure or an hour exposure in the middle of the day. Not easy. Other questions?
Better make it good, Aaron.
Hi, Suzy. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your conception of the audience for your work and maybe how that's changed over time and how it feeds back into the next thing.
Oh, I guess I've been bullheaded enough to always have the sense that I wanted my audience to understand what my work was about, not just see what my work was about. I mean, okay, so if we go back 50 years to like the early conceptual days, all of us coming out of art school I went to Wayne State University, so I could draw the pants off of anybody, I mean, so we were technically quite skilled, and but it was also, reductive minimalism. It was art about art, and it had been for decades. At that time, my generation was really politically active and very socially engaged in the community, and so on and so forth. So it was a period where we were really trying to break down the boundaries between art and life. And it was when we formed the Artist-Run Space Vehicle, we were very, very much interested in having people that don't normally go to galleries. I mean, we would leaflet in factories. We would try and, get, different. So, so I think that when I'm trying to actually have the viewer have a relationship with the experience in the photograph, I don't want it to be interfered with by a high art barrier. I guess it's a little bit more existential, I guess.
We have time for one more question. But we've run out of questions. We have one back there.
Hi. I wasn't going to ask it, but may as well use up the last question. Just to go back to how you started your talk with this trying to find your own voice, and that there's a resistance that happens when you're trying to do that. And initially when you said that, I thought that the resistance was coming from yourself, and then through the talk realized that you're more referring to what's outside. But I wonder, do you, in making the work, especially because you're photographing yourself and you're turning your gaze back onto yourself, do you find resistance within yourself to articulating those things?
Well, I mean, sometimes we're we are our worst enemies. So I think that when I was speaking about the rereading recovery work and where I was peeling the wallpaper and doing the sweeping, I think that, having the figure have a sense of having gone through some sort of past battle, but that's not what the work is about. Like, that's just the baggage that's inherent in the image. Having that figure doing those soothing activities, it allows the defense mechanism of like the internal to kind of relax, so that the voice can come to the fore. So that work I think really does do work with the internal as a double reading, with the sweeping, yeah.
Thank you for the questions. A reminder that the Ryerson Image Centre is open until 9 o'clock tonight, so you have another half an hour if you haven't seen the exhibition or if you'd like to go back and look at it right now. Thank you very much, and thank you, Suzy.
At one point I thought, oh my God, I'm going over time.
All right, thank you. Well, when we go out.